Alrighty, so wasn't sure what to name tonight's episode, so I just named it Naming Things. Now, we've sort of figured out the basic structure of where I was going with a lot of things. Really, dude? Really? We figured out mostly what we want to name things as we go through here, but it's also we figured out how we want to structure things mechanically and story narratively. But it's really, trying to figure out what we're left with at this point to work out. Because I think, as I mentioned before, is we've figured out what we're doing with the setting. Like, you could run a game in the Medusa setting right now. You could run a game mostly in the superhero setting. I think the biggest thing we have to make a change on in the superhero setting is the categories of enchanted items and inflicted powers. What do you call them? Because as it stands right now, I'm just calling them inflicted powers and enchanted items. And I think narratively, those tell you what they are mechanically, but it doesn't tell you what they are narratively. And so it becomes a question at this point of what do you name those categories of things? Likewise, what do you name the creature that causes the zombie apocalypse in my zombie apocalypse setting? And past that point, what do you name each of those settings, and what do you name the entire campaign universe? So the way I've built it out right now, there are four settings essentially that are part of the whole campaign universe. So the settings are what I'm calling right now the Divine Realm, the Medusa, the zombie apocalypse, and the superhero settings. That's not really the best choice structurally for making a world that's interesting and unique. It's sort of like calling somebody the one with the big nose, you know? That's not a naming trend. That's just an unfortunate identifier. So what I need to really do is work my way through some of this naming, and that's one of the bigger factors here. I still have to figure out travel between worlds, but everything else mostly worked out. I did sort of want to go back and revisit some of the discussion of the races because I did some juggling around. I think last I was trying to figure out how to sort out the native population and the half-breeds on that side. The way I'd sort of looked at doing it, I've sort of reworked a lot of the racial racial profiles of the beings in the Divine Realm. So we have the humanoids. Wouldn't always be called that. I imagine to the dwarves it would be the dwarvenoids, and elvenoids, and gnomishoids, and gnomoids. Gnomoids! Ooh, I kind of like that. That sounds good. Gnomoids. Oh, I kind of like that. I'm going to make a note right there. And then I had delineated that humans, dwarves, elves, and gnomes were the 4 high main profiles. Now, I may rename the gnomes in general because it's not the standard gnome format, and I think it might throw some people off, but we'll see, maybe. And then from there, I have split off the half-breeds, which are the half-elves, halflings. I still haven't named the human-dwarf hybrid. Holderfolk for elf gnome. I may rethink the dwarf gnome being a leprechaun. And the Alfar works for me for a dwarf elf. But then I had a whole mess of other things. I had the bestial forms, which were the centaurs, minotaurs, such on and so forth. I did a little tinkering around with some of that. And I sort of did it as treating it as a half-breed of the gnomoids, I guess I'm going to call them now. So starting with the satyrs being bestial dwarf hybrids. I'm not sure I like that. I think I like elves as that better. But that's sort of like a fiddly bit of mechanic to worry about later. Centaurs are another bestial gnomoid hybrid. Now, humans, I sort of have them set to the human beast hybrid. I kind of went with the mermaids or mermen, but again, that could be up in the air there. But the one I liked the most, and it seems to fit the most, was the gnome beast hybrid. It's not the same thing as what I did later with the immortality forms, where the gnomes would take an anthropomorphic animal form. So that one's a little different, but what I went with as a separate race, a crossbreed between animals and gnomes, I went with mouse. So that would be the small end of the spectrum, that 6-inch tall end of the height spectrum, with mouse tails, whiskers, maybe little mouse noses and mouse ears. They're sort of like the borrowers or similar creatures in some of like the children's literature out there. And I think that's an adorable idea, and I kind of want to have them existing. But I also have things like the monstrous half-breed bestial forms that I want to think about, which would include things like the Minotaur. And so I kind of feel like that's maybe going to be mixing with not the gnomoids, but the native population. So the Minotaur might be something along the lines of a bull and a troll. But what I did do was I broke up some of that stuff. The furbolgs, which are sort of a half giant race for playing, they're half breeds of a different set. And I put the tieflings and Aasimar in a separate category. So what I have here now is the gnomoids, the humanoids, the native species, which include things like kobolds and harpies, and I sort of went with trolls, and then there should be a fourth category, which I'm roughly referring to as beastmen, but I'm not sure I like that. What I'm trying to do is reverse engineer goblins and kenku and those types of creatures as half-breeds of 2 or more of those sets. But then there's a third grouping, which is referring to dragons, giants, the angels and demons in the setting, and then the animals. And I have that sort of set up as like the, I almost imagine it like Chronicles of Narnia, speaking animals. And then the half-breeds of that would be furbolgs, tieflings, and Asimir, and things like ogres. And so it's just sort of like figuring out where that all fits together. And figuring out, like, that's a mechanical thing, and there's going to be a little juggling around to see who fits with what. But one of the reasons I bring this up now is in the natives category, we have kobolds, trolls, harpies, and subraces of gremlin, gargoyles, goblins, kenku, and a couple of others that don't have and may have to be completely new fabrications for my setting. So what we have here is kobolds and so we have kobolds and harpy would be gargoyle. Kenku would be harpy and troll? That doesn't feel quite right, but maybe swapping out the kenku and one of the beasts, or the harpy and one of the beast creatures. That one I have to rename, and I set them up. The natives ones have the 4 kobolds, trolls, harpies, and what I call beastmen, because I want them to be native populations born from the blood of the chaos children spilled in the battle. So chaos children are the giants, the dragons, the angelic and demonic entities, and then the animals, the Narnian style animals. And so in that original conflict, you have the blood of each of those falling on the divine realm's ground and potentially stirring or creating new life. So the kobolds would be dragon blood. The trolls would be giant blood. The harpies would be angelic or demonic blood. And then the animal blood would be this other one that I'm roughly calling beast people. And so that's sort of where I want that to end up. I can't do the kenku as the beast people because they are very specifically crow or raven people. And we already have the harpies as a bird-like population. Kenku need to be harpy and something else hybrid. So that's all in that mix. But I still don't really have a name for certain aspects of this. So I don't really have a name for the divine realm. The overall campaign is called Vestiges because that takes place within a realm where you are the remains of a powerful entity. You're a sliver, a vestige of a being. So that makes perfect sense there, but that's for the it's tricky in naming things like this. You can name something for the reader, or you can name something for the characters. So you don't use a name like Star Wars in the Star Wars universe. Han Solo doesn't talk to Luke Skywalker about the Star Wars. That's a different set of naming. And so That's a naming for the audience to partake of the setting. We have vestiges as that type of name. But what is the world in which humans, dwarves, elves, and gnomes live in cities, city-states that float above a chaotic realm full of monsters and danger? And what do we call that realm? I don't know yet. And certain names I've used here, like the leprechaun and the half-dwarf, I feel like those could be named differently. And then the beastmen in the native populations should be renamed. What do we call the crossbreeds between what do we call what makes a goblin? A goblin should be a troll and the other form of like the beastmen. And so that's a goblin. So what is a kobold and the beastmen? What name do we give that one? What identity do we give that one? And then I have to figure out a few of the other similar things to name. I was looking at the Umberhulks is another one that I needed to worry about. They're a created race. And the Umberhulks, I can't use the name Umberhulk for that reason, for the reason that they belong to a company. So looking up things, there was an Egyptian god who was supposedly an very scarab beetle. So a divine scarab beetle, humanoid scarab beetle. And I believe his name was Khepri. And so I was looking at that. I believe it was spelled Khepri. And I did that standard fantasy fiction trick of using alternative spelling. So I have down here as a possible choice for a rename, Qehpry. But I'm thinking that I still need to rethink that. But the other thing I came across today as I was playing around was there's a species of monster in Dungeons and Dragons called a mimic. And the mimic is usually depicted as being a treasure chest with what looks like gold chains hanging out of it, or like the lid slightly ajar so that you can see the treasure inside. And when you go over to try to loot the treasure chest, it opens up, shows its teeth, and you realize, this is like the Venus flytrap or the pitcher plant for insects. But it's a monster that hunts adventurers by tricking them into getting close enough that it can grapple them and eat them. And so these mimics are sort of a notorious Dungeons and Dragons monster. I've heard reference to some being so large that they look like buildings. But I had this sort of idea, like maybe that's the original intent. So I look back at my gnomes and my gnomes creating these things as living boats and living houses and living carriages for travel. And so they're shapers of life. They could shape those life forms to do their bidding. And so they make essentially a pet house, a pet boat, a pet car. And so they're creating these things. So I can't use terms like a mimic, but I could take that concept and go a little bit further. But it also brought to mind that there's another race of beings in some of D&D called changelings that are like mimics. They can mimic the shape of any race and sometimes particular individuals. So they are shapeshifters. They look like other people. And I feel like that should be a creation of these shapers as well. So it introduced a new race. But I need to change their name too, because changelings is what I'm using later on in my superhero setting for non-human nomoid characters who are left to be raised by humans. The classical term for that is a changeling. But I also want to look at changing the name of the immortal forms of some of the races. So the immortal gnome would be an anthro. Right now, as I have it as an anthro, which doesn't quite fit, but then we have Warforged for the dwarf, which Warforged is a proprietary name. Vampire Lich for elves. I want to do something a little bit different from that. Maybe Nosferatu or something else from Legend. And so, like, I have to figure out some of that stuff. Name-wise, I don't have what I need figured out there. And so, like, I feel like the big one to focus on right now is the names of the settings. And maybe the name of the half-dwarf and leprechaun option. I don't know. I might even just leave leprechaun. That one's not super bad. So let's do a little playing around with how to come up with names. So let's head over onto the wonders of the internet and just start doing some fun little searches. So synonyms for divine. Godly, godlike, angelic, seraphic. Heavenly, celestial, empyrean. Ah, that's got some potential to it. Not only is this realm the empire of the divine beings, like you start in a small village, but there is a capital city ruled over by the powerful sorcerer, what was it? The god emperors that I use. And so something that says the word empire in it that's not bad. I'll have to play with that a little bit. I'll have to look up the definition and hash out the etymology of it a little bit more. But that's a pretty good find right off the bat. So Empyrean, EMPYREAN is the word. So that's a decent one for that one. So I may change my mind about it later, but for right now, let's pretend that's the start. Synonym for superhero. Champion, exemplar, paladin, defender. Okay, so hero, champion, exemplar, model. That's not a good choice. Guardian, protector, savior. What else we got? Antonyms are villain and nemesis. Ooh, I wonder what happens if we do nemesis, and then the antonym for nemesis would be associate happiness. Nope. Okay, that didn't work. That led us completely down the wrong path. Dude, work for me now. Come on. Now it's crashing. All right, cool. Awesome. That's super useful. No, don't. Don't be a dork about it. Superhero. Hero, champion, exemplar, model, paladin, defender, guardian, protector, savior. Let's see if there are any other options further down. No, that's sort of just it. Okay. Wow, not a lot of options there. Exemplar. Paragon. Archetype. Paradigm. Standard, pattern. What else we got? Epitome, exemplar, paragon. Paragon feels like it's got some examples of that somewhere. Apotheosis, epitome, exemplar, archetype. Champion seems like a fair option. Pattern, paradigm, quintessence. Champion, a challenger, a champ, defender, hero, medalist, number one. Some of these synonyms are way off base. Guardian. Guardians might be an option. Vanquisher, victor, vindicator, upholder, sympathizer, protector. So guardian. So guardian, we have angel, attendant, champion, chaperone, conservator, curator, custodian, defender, escort, guard, paladin, safeguard, sentinel. Sentinel's not a bad option. Vigilante, warden. You could do warden. So let's take a look at sentinel. Guard, keep, lockout, picket, protector, watchman, woman, watch person. So sentinels. Okay, so let's go with sentinels for right now. So that one can go for the superhero setting. What do we do for Medusa? That one feels a little more tricky because not only do we like the Sentinel setting can be both a audience name and a universe name. So in this universe, you can imagine the population thinking of these people with powers as sentinels in their population. We use the word mutant or superheroes, but they may just think of them as sentinels. That works. It also gives us a sense of a character title, like the Avengers is a character title that we can imagine making sense. It's in the Marvel universe, somebody can refer to the Avengers. Outside of the Marvel universe, I can say the Avengers, and you know who I'm talking about. So it's a term, Sentinels can work that way. We may have to do two ways of doing something for the Medusa setting, because that one feels like it should be something like the Serpent's Children may be something we use as an audience name for that setting. But what they call it would be whatever they call their known world. So, in Greek mythology, there are things like the, what is it, Hyborian? Or Hyperborean, so beyond the north wind or whatever. They had a name for the known world and beyond the known world, and that's sort of what they called that area. That's what the world was as far as they were concerned. And I feel like we kind of have to do something like that. I don't think Serpent's Children has to be one and not the other. Theoretically, the characters in the Medusa setting could imagine themselves and refer to themselves as the children of the serpent or something of that effect. So let's start with Serpent's Children. And leave a question mark on terms like Hyperborean about pursuing that a little bit further. So that would be more about the Greco-Roman model of the universe at that time. Now, the zombie apocalypse setting, again, that's one of the things, like an informative name, like Sentinels works really well for the superhero setting because it sets in mind like guards, champions, soldiers of some kind as both the iconic image of the setting as well as an aspect of the setting that people are aware of. So it's an Avengers territory. It's a Sentinels situation. So, although to be fair, nobody in the Sentinel setting is going to think that their world is defined by them. So, like some dirt farmer on the edge of a city state in the Sentinel setting is going to go like, "Oh yes, we're the Sentinels world." Nope, that's not on their mind. So maybe I'm being a little too persnickety. So maybe I need to figure out the name of the planet. And then, let's see, the zombie apocalypse. I shouldn't keep calling it that. What do I call that? I don't even know what to call the creatures that are infesting that world. Like, I feel like an appropriately dark sense of like naming that as like that which remains. That feels like the world has ended. This is just what remains. We're the we're the we're the we're the vestiges of what once was. So I mean, in its own way, it is a chunk of the vestiges. But that's not. I don't think that's the right way to talk about it. Because it's not informative. Serpent's Children tells you you're dealing with snake people, roughly. Sentinels tells you you're dealing with champions and heroes of some kind. Empyrean tells you you're sort of dealing with a celestial empire, I guess. So what are we calling after the fall? Like, what do we call that? Because even if you say like the end times or something like that, that doesn't tell you why it's the end time. Like the overarching theme of each of these things, Empyrean is a world of empires and angelic and demonic battles. Sentinels are champions and warriors for causes. Serpent's Children are a population, a group of people descended from a serpent. What each one of those tells you about a key identity. Divinities, heroes, serpents. The thing that identifies the zombie apocalypse setting, and I keep calling it that, even though it's not really remotely accurate anymore, because they're not actually zombies. They're infested, parasitically infested human beings or humanoids. And the parasite could be symbiotic if it wanted to. I'm thinking of it almost like the Spider-Man Venom symbiote. But I'm also thinking of it sort of like the Goa'uld from Stargate SG-1. Because in Stargate SG-1, you have the Tok'ra, which are related to the Goa'uld. But they are voluntary symbiotic relationships with their host. So you have the option of that occurring. So the key characters, the key thing that defines the zombie apocalypse world are these goo, ooze, slime symbiotes. I need to name them, and I need to build an identity for the setting based off of them. And that's going to be the hard one, I think. So maybe I'm making this more difficult than it has to be. So what do we go out to synonyms and we search words like slime, goo, gunk, mucus, mud, sludge, fungus, glop, mire, ooze, scum, crud, dirt, filth, mire, muck. Okay, so let's go with sludge. I don't know. It's the least childish sounding. Top, goop, mire. I'm thinking of a term. Okay, so there's a. That's not bad. Okay, so, like I know you can't hear what's in my head, so I need to verbalize it. Sorry. So there used to be a term where you lived in a village or a city, and everything outside of that was dangerous wilderness. And so there used to be this term for people who would work as individuals outside of towns and villages as sort of like the go-between between the wild world and the civilized world. I can't remember what it is, but I feel like at some point in some story I heard somewhere, somebody referred to them as merc riders. I think it was something like a hedge rider or something like that. But a merc rider was somebody who, like a term I've heard somewhere, or I feel like I've heard it somewhere. I could try doing a search. And I think it was spelled Myrkrider. Merc rider. Nothing's coming up. Let's try MI, Mark Rider. Nope, it's trying to autocorrect it. Nope, so it does not seem like it's... Okay, so here we go. An Icelandic English dictionary. Okay, what do we got here? What do we got? What do we got? What do we got? Come on, spell it out for me. Where is it? You can't tell me it's there and then don't show it to me. This is stupid. You need to do this better than this. Page 441 of an Icelandic. So, yeah, where is it? You've got to show it to me. So we've got... Okay, so here we go. God, tiny print. Is there a way to zoom in on that? So, the Merc Rider. An ogress witch, for witches were supposed to ride on wolves. And that's like the biggest example of a use of this term. Okay, Mercurica, supposedly from Latin. So what does that mean in Latin? Knight Rider. Well, not that kind of Knight Rider. But here's... Okay, this works because Murk, if I'm looking at these black slimes that infest people, the murk within your veins, the murk outside of the village, the people who lived outside of the villages were murk riders. Murk could be mercenaries. Murk could be the dark, inky blackness. Murk could be the dirt or the infection, the grossness that gets into somebody. And riders can be the people who are going out through that. They can also be the people who are being ridden like a horse by that infection. So I do think that's probably where we're going to go. I like it. Okay. And it's a term I've wanted to play with for a very long time, and I always feel like it's a term that feels like it should have a property attached to it, but I can't find anything for it. So we're going with Murk Rider setting. Now, each one of these places is going to have a name for the world that the people in that world use. And those are names I'm going to have to come up with. So I will have to come up. We're hitting 45 minutes in here, so I'm probably going to have to come back to this naming game. But I'm going to have to also name the half-dwarf, the leprechaun, the Umber Hulk, Does Kepri work as a name? Like, that's one of the hard things for me to figure out is, like, to do this right, you both have to bury the roots of the actual term you're using, but at the same time, it has to have a genuine feeling of being the name or identity of the beings you're talking about. Nobody gets a giant draconic looking monster and calls them quibbles. That's just, you don't do that. It doesn't work. So, like, there are definitely things that feel very specifically right for them. I need to rename the changelings and mimics. I might not have to do the mimics. I might be able to get away with that one. And I might want to rename the term natives. Bestials works. The created needs to be renamed. And then worlds. To the characters. And that's like the big stuff I think I have remaining to do for setting naming in particular. I think I also have to do powers. Yeah, I have to name the powers in most of the settings. All right, powers. And that's most of that. I also have to figure out cross-world travel. And there are a few other little details to nitpick at later. So I will get onto that. I guess we're starting a new month, and well, I mean, for me, we're already in a new month. We're in March at this point, I think. I'm hoping to start off this month with some other types of video updates on both my channels. So here's looking to trying to get some things done. I got totally wrecked with health problems today, and everything I tried to do yesterday broke things that I couldn't afford to break. It just drove me nuts. Everything went totally wrong yesterday. Glad to be having yesterday, but well, I guess technically for me now, it's the day before yesterday behind me. Yeah, Saturday wasn't a hugely bad day, but I had a lot of problems. My digestive system gave out on me earlier in the day and just ruined me. Nothing but problems all day with it. But, I mean, it's part of my health. Like, I'm used to it at this point. It's just part of what you deal with. But I got to do some things tomorrow afternoon. But after that, I want to sit down and put some real work into getting forward with some of my other stuff. So here's hoping we can get some things going. I will catch you tomorrow. I need to putz around a little bit here and go get something to eat. I'm going to see if I can make some, what was it? I was going to use some flour tortillas and make some French toast with them. See if that works. Yeah, that's probably not the best choice after a day of being sick, but we'll give it a try. So take care and good night. I will catch you on the morrow. Hopefully. I know I think I missed yesterday without planning to. Story of my life right now. Best laid plans of mice and men, as they say, right?